Chris O'Connor here. Join our prestigious Curmudgeonly community on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock. Also be on the lookout for a Spotify playlist dedicated to this episode. Now let's get started.
This is the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and this is your podcast made by rock geek iconoclastic outsiders for rock geek iconoclastic outsiders. For those of you who lament that rock music has gone the way of jazz and slipped into niche genre status, we are here to keep that flame alive by providing insight, analysis, recommendations, and honest takes, not hot takes. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some rock history you never knew before. Once upon a time, James Borwn decided that being one of R&B's most inspired and inspiring band leaders and showmen wasn't where it was for him anymore. The show wasn't the thing. The horns weren't the thing. The hits weren't the thing. The romance of soul music wasn't the thing. By 1967, the rhythm was the thing. Actually, for James Borwn, the rhythm became the only thing and encompassed everything. Sexuality, black empowerment, swagger, heartache, joy. It all burst forth in pure, loud, powerful, inescapable rhythm. Borwn's insatiable itch for rhythm manifested itself in what he called the one. The one referred to the first beat in a measure comprising 4 beats, whereas the emphasis in most Western music was traditionally on the second beat. Borwn shifted all of his rhythmic energy over to the first beat. So, when the time came to repeat a measure, the one crashed down with the force of 40 thunderclaps with all of the hammers from all of the gods. The one marked a bold, revolutionary shift in popular music, one that within a generation became the driver of nearly all popular music in America, whether black or white. Funk, disco, house, electronica, new jack swing, and even the teen pop of acts like NSYNC. And later on, of course, and before the teen pop, hip hop. Mr. Dynamite's One also became a fascinating musical export, influencing the development of musical styles in the Caribbean, Africa, and other parts of the world. Most importantly, the development of hip-hop and the one was inextricably linked. Borwn was also the original go-to source for samples used by hip-hop producers in the late 1980s. Fight the Power by Public Enemy? It's built on the bass groove of Hot Pants. TROY by Pete Rock and CL Smooth, it borrows from Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. South Bronx by Boogie Down Productions, arguably the best of many, many, many hip-hop songs that sampled the drums from Funky Drummer. It's amazing to consider how much music, culture, and plain damn upheaval sprouted from the one. And that simple act of creative genius that Borwn produced. But that is indeed the story of James Borwn and the one. And it's the one that yours truly, Curmudgeons, will celebrate on this second installment of our 3-part retrospective of the career, music, and undying legacy of James Borwn. Chris and I both worship at the altar of the one, and it will be pretty obvious when you listen to this episode. It's truly an honor to share our truly geeky excitement over this brilliant 8-year stretch of James Borwn's career. Starting with 1967's stick of audio dynamite, Cold Sweat, we will run through a staggering run of hits that changed everything in all popular music. And we'll do it with the type of unhinged, twitchy energy that would make Mr. Borwn proud. Well, we hope so anyway. Welcome to the Curmudgeon Rock Report and Part 2 of James Borwn, the super bad Mr. Dynamite of all legacies.
Arturo, James Borwn really did change everything, didn't he? I mean, without his discovery of the sheer mastery of the one, pop music and, dare I say, protest music as we know it today does not exist. Am I right?
Yeah, this period of James Borwn that we're talking about on this episode, this is not only the greatest period of his career, it's the most important one, and one of the most important streaks any 20th century artist has ever had in music. This is right up there with the Beatles' hot streaks. This is right up there with Dylan's hot streak. I mean, this is there. And you can make the case that this is more influential than either one of those two. And that's saying something.
I don't think there's a doubt. I mean, you get whole genres of music and whole genres of cultural attitude that are born from this 8-year streak that James Borwn pulled off. I mean, this is revolutionary genius of the highest order. Which is, that's something that I sit on the top there. So anyway, how you doing, man?
I'm doing fine. I'm ready to get up, get into it, get involved.
You know where rock and roll is still revered as the Thang, right?
Yes.
Yes, there's this place called the Parallel Universe where rock and roll still gets up and does its thing on the grandest stages of them all, and on the billboards and in the stadiums and in the arenas and on the radio stations. Yes, there actually is such a thing as rock radio stations that are not top 40, and that is where we are in the Parallel Universe. That's a fancy way of saying that this is the segment of the episode where we cover new music and new albums. Arturo and I each cover an album of recent vintage, whether it's very recent vintage, as in just out, or sometime in the last decade. Yes, there is a vault over here in the Parallel Universe, which we lovingly call the Parallel Vault, but that's something for another day. We're in Africa. We're in Parallel Africa.
For both our selections.
Yes, and so we will be starting in, of all places, EDM groove heavy Uganda.
Yeah, it's very fitting that we're in Africa for both selections for the Parallel Universe, because this episode of James Borwn, this period of his music, is the most Afrocentric of his career. So yeah, we're on that groove, and the groove starts with Faizal Mostrixx, spelled Faizal, first name, Mostrixx, Mostrixx. He is a producer from Uganda who just recently put out a nifty, groovy little record called Mutations. Essentially, Mostrixx takes traditional African a cappella vocals from the various indigenous tribes in or around Uganda and augments them with weird, off-kilter EDM beats and rhythms. It is an often, note I say often, thrilling listen. It doesn't always work. There are 2 or 3 tracks that incorporate a little too much cheesy synthesizer, but the best songs are the ones that groove a little more steadily and are heavily percussive. Select songs, the Latin rhythms meet Vangelis vibe of Back to Tanzania. The dubstep goes to the jungle groove of, well, Tunes of the Jungle, and the tension-filled progressive electro of Likely, where the guy doing the chanting vocals sounds like he's saying something about marijuana. I'm not really sure. But anyway, in a year for music that is getting increasingly mediocre and filled with retro revival artists, this is a solid 3.5-star album that actually has some originality and innovation to it. Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that there is there's a uniqueness in the reverb, and there's this woozy kind of psychedelic quality to what he's doing here that's pretty singular. When you are talking about, as you said, it's almost like cave recordings from Uganda, and sort of stretched and slowed and distorted in these beats. And I saw a quote from Mr. Mostrixx on his Bandcamp profile. His label quotes him as saying, Afrofuturism, this is what he calls it, Afrofuturism is a way to describe the meeting of the electronic and the tribal. It's about bringing the past into the now and then imagining how it could be expressed in the future. Very simple explanation, but I think it fits here, and that's a pretty decent exercise. I'll give him that. It's certainly much better than that Acid Arab album that
Oh, come on. This is sexy Middle Eastern men dancing to those club grooves. Come on, you gotta love that.
Oh, stop. Basically that, that's just like cheesy, like wedding hall reverence, where this is like actually, in a way, it's kind of the same exercise. And actually, I think might actually be of the same vintage, and at least with stuff like Back to Tanzania is better. It's kind of the same thing that Moby was doing with all those Alan Lomax recordings on Play.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're taking those indigenous, or you're taking those field recordings, I guess is the best way to put them.
But Mostrixx is funkier though.
Yeah, it is funkier, and it's definitely spacier. That's, I think that's the word. It's kind of like taking the tribes and guerrillas of Uganda and taking them to the moon and Mars and beyond. It's kind of neat. Now we're going to stay on the continent of Africa, and we go from Uganda a little farther south to Zambia, and to a band that some of you, if you've been digging in the crates your whole lives, may have actually heard of. It's this band called WITCH, which, as I understand it, stands for We Intend to Cause Havoc. That is what WITCH stands for. And so here's one of the more fascinating stories of the year. This band, WITCH, they were one of the foremost progenitors of what was known as Zamrock, which came about in the very early 70s. And Zamrock, it comes during a period of great upheaval in that region. Essentially, Zambia is what used to be known as Northern Rhodesia. Southern Rhodesia is Zimbabwe. Zambia also borders, their neighbor to the north is Congo. Oh, gee, this is a safe neighborhood. I'm telling you, and so Zambia it's a kind of a fascinating little place. It's known as one of the great copper rich places in the world, and so it's known for its copper mining and other mineral riches. But it also was subject, starting from 1964 into the 90s, to authoritarian socialist rule of a really aggressive sort. And so, yes, you had an atmosphere that was rife with revolution and rife for voices of dissent, or voices, or I don't know, this sort of using music to make yourself heard. And so along comes this movement called Zamrock. And what Zamrock was a really weird mix. It was like the least African of the African 70s musical movements in a way, because it found its inspiration in the psychedelic rock of not really San Francisco, but more like Hendrix. Really heavily influenced by Hendrix, really heavily influenced by the bluesmen, the Peter Greens and the Tony Iommis, and the other guitarists, Jimmy Pages of London. But then it also adds touches of American R&B and funk, James Brown and others being big influences, but also reggae. And so you get this really sort of chilled out, fuzzed out, jammy mix of lots of styles. I mean, it's closer to Steve Miller than it is to Fela Kuti. And so, which comes out of this sort of movement of music, and they come out in the early 70s. And the leader of this band was a guy named Emineo Chandra. His nickname is Jaggery. It's spelled Jagari, but spelled or pronounced Jaggery, as in he was a big fan of Mick Jagger.
Yeah, I was about to say that sounds like an adjective for anything you do that's Mick Jagger like.
Yes, and this guy was kind of a peacock, is kind of a peacock, and actually did get that nickname from Mick Jagger, or from his reverence for Mick Jagger. And so they did these three or four records between 72 and 76. This really fascinating mix of like, what if Bob Marley and Syd Barrett were in the same band with Steve Miller singing? Was a lot of, well, yeah, I mean, it really is a crazy ass mix. And so they're doing these. But what happened is that as Zambia got more war torn and more under that really sort of firm authoritarian rule, the pressure's got a little much, and Chandra eventually quits the band, and they lost their nerve a little bit. By 1980, they're a cheesy disco band. If you want to hear a genuinely terrible record, 1980s Move On. Yeah, as in move on from this shit. It's not very good. And so they went dormant, and after 1984, they disappeared. Well, like a lot of things in the aughts and early tens, the American vinyl digging in the crates set from New York rediscovered the joys of Zamrock, and in 2011, a 4-disc box set was released. It's called Witch, We Intend to Cause Havoc. And again, it's 4 discs, it's 3.5 hours, and it's just like basically all of their stuff. And lo and behold, because of this new interest, Chandra's got new life. And so he comes back and they reform Witch with a couple of European dudes. It's like basically young guys. There's one other original still around. And after all this, for the first time in 39 years, Witch, I mean, this sounds like the plot of a Christopher Guest movie. This is kind of like a Mighty Wind African division. They come up with a new album called Zango, and this was just released last month. I would recommend listening to it because it is a very eclectic, very strange little record that, as suggested by their stuff from 50 years ago, comes out of an acid tinged blender, but it's actually the bizarre thing about Zango. It might be the most African sounding thing that this African band ever has produced. After 40 something, 50 something years, now all of a sudden you do have more presence of African polyrhythms to go with some of the Sabbath loving riffs and some of the other classic rock, Jethro Tullish type of touches. And so what you end up with, it's a kind of a wacky record that sprawls all over the place. It's like one measure psychedelic rock, one measure progressive rock, lots of retro buzzsaw guitar soloing. And, Jaggery's not so much a singer so much as he is kind of like a toaster. He's kind of like an MC in an old Coal Rock a Party type of affair. Yeah. And so it's a fun listen, but don't go into it expecting real songs. And, don't go in with too high of expectations. So ultimately, Zango, this album by Witch, Zango, proves that thanks to the undying devotion of everything 70s, all that is old can still be old again. There is not a shred of true originality here, but sometimes a fuzzed out eclectic celebration of, eclecticism is enough to satisfy us all. Long live We Intend to Cause Havoc.
Yeah, I think this particular album, I think, is pretty good. Like I said, it's not the most original. I've heard sounds like this before done by other bands from other African countries. However, hopefully what this album does is get people to go back and listen to Witch's back catalog. Yeah. That's what the real good stuff is.
Chris here again. We usually end our episodes by inviting you to join our Curmudgeonly community page on Facebook. Well, we're picking up our efforts there. Know people just as passionate as us about rock and roll? Invite them to join in the fun. You don't actually need our permission to do so. Also, expect to see a lot more content up there moving forward. Our mission is to engage you, so darn it, we'll engage you like a fire hose, or maybe like a firehouse if we're going to give love to Gene Simmons. We may also be making a few offers. Want to wear a t-shirt featuring our logo? You may have that opportunity soon. So be a fellow curmudgeon, help us expand our little community, and share your own musings via your own posts. We're at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock.
Well, folks, now we get to talk about the hardest working man in show business, hardest working period, in which everything as we know it literally changed, where he went from a band leader extraordinaire to something fairly extraterrestrial. It's hard to describe. He became his own instrument, and
Yeah, really
for the
did.
betterment of music and the betterment of society. Here's a quote that I think kind of shows you where Brown was at the time, and kind of showed he almost had kind of a charming, goofy self-awareness to him. And so
Right.
here's a quote to share. Quote, "The hardest thing about being James Brown is I have to live. I don't have I don't have no downtime." Unquote. So yeah, that's yeah, he don't have no downtime, and we were all better for it. So speaking of having no downtime, everybody, I hope you're ready. We are having, this is the world's longest lightning round because
Really is.
the
And
lightning
some of
never
these,
ends.
some of the tracks here are long as hell too.
Yep. And so let us get started. He had a string of really a whole bunch of number one or almost number one R&B hits. So it was on the R&B charts that he made his mix, that he made his greatest mark here. But some of these songs managed to find their way into the top 10 pop charts on Billboard as well. Correct, Parker?
Absolutely. Some of them went into a few of them went top 10. A bunch of them went top 20, actually.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So yes, it's not just he wasn't doing these revolutions on the sideline. He was doing this live and in color, in your living room and zap to you. He pulled for somebody to pull off the kind of shit that Brown did while he was this popular is pretty amazing.
Yeah, he really is. Well, anyway, let's start with the one from 1966. It's a man's world. Number one R&B, number 8 in the pop chart. It's strange to start a rundown of James Brown's funkiest period with what is basically a ballad, but it's not just one of Brown's biggest hits. It was frequently covered by the Grateful Dead in the late 1960s.
Oh, I did not.
It's also an interesting look into the man's psychology. Brown's lyrics were usually glorifications of his ego and his masculinity, with the oncoming funk period taking that premise to the extreme. But here, Brown is admitting that while it's a man's world, it wouldn't be nothing without a woman or a girl. It's awfully generous of him to extol the virtues of womanhood, even if that womanhood is subjugated to the all-encompassing power of
Yeah,
his
pretty much.
manliness. Yet the lyrical sincerity gets a little undermined when you read about the man's personal life and his history of physically abusing women. However, if you can manage to suspend that for a minute, this is one of Brown's most simmering, passionate, powerful ballads with lyrics that clearly aren't throwaway in any way. His vocals are powerful, but they're also nuanced with delicate phrasing and his patented howl only coming in when needed. It's a killer track. Too bad Brown couldn't live up to the lyrical sentiment in his real life.
Yeah,
Chris?
pretty much. I mean, you do have to suspend some disbelief when it comes to tender James Brown.
Yeah.
He was definitely tender on this record, though. It's one of his great vocals, and like you said, he keeps the screaming to a minimum. Which this really is the end of James Brown 1.0. James Brown 1.0 was a sensational band leader and a sensational frontman crooner. Sort of the traditional out front, song and dance man, basically.
Right.
Like he could have been Sammy Davis Jr. I mean, let's face it, if he had wanted to, he had that kind of sort of straight entertainer talent. But this song is pretty extraordinary too, because essentially what it is, it's 12-bar blues done as a porch song, and so
Yeah.
it literally is. It's a man's world. It's a man's world, but it ain't nothing with a woman. It follows that traditional blues, even lyrical structure, and so
Yeah.
not even just the measures. It's also the way that he structures the choruses, or the way that they progress. So it's a pretty neat musical accomplishment. As an aside, a friend of mine here in Houston, Don Payne, if you're listening, how's it going, dude? you can find this on YouTube. Apparently, before Brown died, this was maybe 20 years ago at this point, him and Luciano Pavarotti hooked up at a 90th anniversary celebration of Decca Records, who I guess both they distributed both Brown and Pavarotti, but they got together in concert to do a version of "It's a Man's World," intercut with some Pavarotti opera, and the seamlessness of it is extraordinary. It really is worth checking out, and especially you want to talk about two men wearing more makeup than a Bloomingdale's on stage with Pavarotti and Brown. If it had rained, that shit would have melted big time, and everybody was on that stage. That's way too much fucking makeup for two men to be wearing it.
Yeah, well, you know what? James Brown used to put a lot of like conch and gel in his hair to make it stylish. It was around this period, late 60s, mid to late 60s, when he stopped using it because, the whole Black Power movement was about naturalism. We have to, take pride in our afros and our natural look. And he started doing this around 1967, 68. Speaking of 1967, Cold Sweat, #1 R&B, #7 in the pop chart. Chris, you mentioned in the last episode that James Brown's patented On the One formula was birthed 2 years previously with his massive hits, Papa's Got a Brand New Bag and I Feel Good. I kind of disagree. You can hear the alchemy of the one being formulated, but its truest form and its proper introduction came with this song. Quite possibly, Cold Sweat is the first truest funk song to hit the Billboard singles chart. And it's most definitely the first funk song to be a major hit. Now, back in 2014, the late Chadwick Boseman, the actor, delivered an amazing performance portraying James Brown in the very good biopic film Get On Up. There's a scene in the film that takes place around 1966 or 67 when Brown is rehearsing with his band. He stops the proceedings and attempts to explain his new idea. He asks the guitarist, pointing to the guitar, "What's that?" Guitarist says, "It's a guitar, Mr. Brown." Brown says, "No, it ain't. It's a drum." Then he goes to the horn section, pointing at a saxophone. "Hey, man, what's that?" Brown asks. "It's a saxophone, Mr. Brown," says the saxophonist. "No, it ain't," says Brown. "It's a drum." And on he went with each instrument. The point being that everything is percussion.
Yep.
He wanted the entire band to be the human embodiment of one constant churning rhythm. Melody and harmony vocals were to be stripped away. Classic songwriting was to be reduced to its bone dry minimum. Anything musically superfluous was to be removed. And every instrument, every note was to serve the purpose of the perpetuity of continuous body movement. The tribal rhythms of Africa distilled to its very essence with a classic Southern American flavor, all kept together by the one. And that is Cold Sweat. Chris, we can devote an entire episode to the recording of this song.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, it really is an amazing accomplishment. And you're right. I mean, if the one was birthed in effect in Papa's Got a Brand New Bag and those songs, this is where it really, if it's birthed then, this is where it comes to the forefront, and the one becomes an absolute thing here.
Yeah.
Where the 1 and 3 officially take over. Ain't no subtlety, like you said. With this song. And the thing about Cold Sweat that is amazing, yes, I would say that this probably is the first funk hit. It's metronomic as hell, but also just it's soulful as hell too. So it's got this very cold, rigid bass and drum backbone with like the most organic horn arrangements imaginable on top of it. And I think a lot of folks listening, if you have not heard Cold Sweat, yes, you have. Why? Because if you were 13 or older in the late 1980s, starting in about 1987, every single piece and component of Cold Sweat was sampled over and over and over and over and over again in the early hip hop canon. Basically, early New York hip hop singles with James Brown was the go-to source for all of those samples. And so Public Enemy even made good use of Cold Sweat twice. First on Prophets of Rage from It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back in 1988. And then they used it again in Welcome to the Terror Dome in 1990 on Fear of a Black Planet. So it's just one of those just influential, just grooves and just everything. It really is just kind of a deconstruction of rhythm. And I guess what we can say is, thank you, Mr. Brown, for getting bored with doing it straight. The idea is, we quoted him last episode in an interview saying that he figured out early on that his thing was the rhythm and not the horns and not the slickness. Yeah, and so he just went with what brought him to the dance, and boy did he.
Yeah. The next track on this list, I Got The Feelin, from 1968, number 1 R&B again, number 6 on the pop chart, really higher than Cold Sweat, actually.
Yep.
In fact, it's a very close cousin or even a sibling of Cold Sweat. I Got The Feelin sees James Brown getting closer to perfecting his funk formula. It moves like a finely tuned engine with the by now patented choppy horn riffs with saxophone solo knocking on the door of the reckless abandon that Brown's horn section would indulge in later on. Chris?
Baby, 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 baby. This song is I Got You, I Feel Good, cranked to like 16.
Yeah.
Just as minimal and just as passionate and just as defined by its horns, but it's faster, it's swingier, it's more intense, it's wilder, it's sweatier, it's more nihilistic. And it's a runaway train, but a beautifully organized runaway train. It's this cool little tight nugget that sounds like it's almost about to lose its shit. And that's just the energy, just it folds on itself. It's an incredible song. And there's a live version of it, well, a quote unquote live version of it on an album we'll talk about in a little bit, that's even faster and even more nihilistic, which makes it even impressive.
Yeah, damn, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, the live version is better, and we'll talk about that soon.
Yeah.
All right, next. Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, from 1968, number 1 in the R&B charts, number 10 in the pop chart. And here we get James Brown's most explicitly political song yet. And frankly, it's his boldest song. For a modern day perspective, it's impossible to understand how daring it was for Brown to put this out as a single in 1968. It was the height of Vietnam War protesting. And more importantly, it was a time during the civil rights movement when African Americans started to get more radicalized. Martin Luther King Jr. had just been assassinated and tensions were high. The Black Panthers were starting to become a thing. For a Black person to say, I'm Black and I'm proud, was generally interpreted by white people at the time as a middle finger to the face.
Oh, yeah.
Then again, there are idiots nowadays who misinterpret Black Lives Matter as Black lives mattering more than white lives. So maybe we haven't come that far.
Nope.
But in any case, Brown releasing this song put him squarely in the vanguard of African-American entertainers and pop stars who were willing to put their beliefs up front and their careers on the line by clearly choosing sides and not pandering to the mainstream pop music establishment. In fact, in 1968, there were precious few artists, even Black artists, in the field that Brown worked in that actually did so. He was rewarded with a huge hit and, in my opinion, one of his 10 best songs, one that should be considered one of his signature songs. The One is in full effect with a monster groove and all children's chorus that softens the blow of the seemingly militant message, and Brown delivers the lyrics with a blustery sincerity that transcends racial lines. When he sings I'm Black and I'm Proud, he invites everyone, white, black, brown, red, to say I'm Black and I'm proud. Black it stops becoming ethnicity. It becomes humanity. It's one of the most stirring motions of intent in pop music history. Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. As an anthem of identity, there's hardly any better in the history of popular music. I think this is Brown's most meaningful song. Maybe it's not his most important song to the development of the rock and roll / R&B / funk canon, but it's his most meaningful song in the sense of not only is he standing up in 1968 and saying I'm Black and I'm proud, like you said, during that period where things are starting to get more sinister and darker, and like you said, King and RFK are getting assassinated. You've got John Carlos and Tommy Smith getting disqualified at the Olympics for doing the Black Power salute. So not only is he saying I'm Black and I'm proud, but he's using a chorus of children to do it. That's not softening the blow. That's like handing down a generational gift to kids.
Yeah. And being subversive too.
And being subversive and empowering those kids who, at that point, remember, I mean, one of King's greatest failed movement was trying to get schools get national exposure to the school inequality in Chicago. That blew up in his face. It didn't go very well, but it just underscores that it gives voice to those children. That's a pretty amazing thing. And so not only are you're singing about the beauty of your identity, but it's also a way of saying, hey, we're going to have a voice too, and we're going to have a dog in this hunt as well. And so I think that's pretty remarkable. I mean, even going back to the 80s, I mean, like when you and I were in our early teens, when Jesse Jackson's running for president, I mean, that's still practically like a national anthem for young Black and brown children in America. I don't know if that's the case anymore, but it's just a wonderful statement and a wonderful accomplishment. Let me give you a quote that where Brown is sort of coming from. He did a television interview in 1968, and I found this in a clip in YouTube where he says, quote, "There's nobody in the world who can identify with my people better than me. I'm a Negro. I don't want to be nothing but a Negro because that's what I am. But that still don't stop me from being a man. I've got to be a man too." And so, I mean, that's a very Brown statement. It's like, I am what I am, but I'm more than what you think I am, Right. And so there's this dignity that Brown had. And I'm telling you, God bless egomania. And so this is like one beautiful distillation of this egomania, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. And he definitely had an ego for it. Well, he came back. How did he follow that up? Well, he gets away from the socio-political sloganeering, and he comes up with Give It Up or Turn It Loose from 1969, number 1 again, R&B, number 15 pop. Now, in its original form, this song has the one, but is a bit more mid-tempo and subdued, probably intentionally restrained to appeal more to mainstream white audiences. However, the following year, when James Brown stopped giving a shit what mainstream white audiences thought, Mr. Brown re-recorded it for his 1970 album, It's a New Day, Let a Man Come In. The result was a raging beast of funk power, enhanced by bongos and his new slim trim band, the JBs, more on them later. With its insane mid-song breakdown, it's easily one of the most powerful and, well, manly grooves in Brown's entire repertoire. Chris?
Yeah, and it's pretty remarkable because, we have to give it up for this song because it's a remarkable recording that was done remarkably well twice, as you said. So the first version from 1969, this is the first appearance on this list of songs that we're talking about in this episode of saxophonist Maceo Parker and trombonist and champion arranger and bandleader Fred Wesley.
Maceo!
Maceo! Yeah, and
he would do that repeatedly, chanting out his when he put during this period performing live, he would chant out his band members' names like just randomly. Ugh, ACO,
Fred, Fred.
as a way for them to come in and do their solo, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And both of these guys were just absolutely remarkable soloists and players, and they could do the in the horn arrangements and hit that, like you said, that staccato horn beat that Brown became known for. And they were kind of the heart of that, but also both amazing solos. So they show up on the first recorded version, that mid-tempo version of Give It Up or Turn It Loose. And then in 1970, when it goes like full on, just runaway train, this is where you get Catfish and Bootsy Collins, 17-year-old Bootsy Collins. He's 2 weeks shy of his 18th birthday when this thing is recorded.
Wow.
And Catfish is Bootsy's brother on guitar. And so you get them, but not only that, but you get Clyde Stubblefield on drums and accompanied by a conga player. And so you get this just absolute, just rhythm, just absolute, just like I said, just a machine. It's like a war machine of funk is that second version. And it is just gnarly as hell. And again, Brown, we said it last episode, we'll say it again, whether it was slow or medium to high or supersonic, that man was a master of tempo. That he could find the folds and the nooks and crannies of a rhythm, the deep, deep, deep texture of a rhythm, no matter what the tempo was. And so he could take the same song, do three different versions of it at three different speeds, and make them just three absolutely booming powder kegs of originality. And I think that the two versions of Give It Up and Turn It Loose are one of the better proofs of that in the entire catalog.
Yeah, no matter what tempo, up tempo, down tempo, mid tempo, he still managed to be funky and danceable either way. Coming up next, Mother Popcorn, in parentheses, You've Got to Have a Mother for Me. From 1969, number 1 R&B again, number 11 pop, pretty high. By this point, Brown was so preoccupied with riding the one into the stratosphere and grasping at whatever cosmic funk dust he could get his hands on. All sensical lyrical occupations and allusions to melody were abandoned in favor of serving one universal, sexualized, sweaty, funky bump and grind. Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, so basically from this point on, basically 1969 to 1973, as you just said, any pretense of these songs being songs is abandoned within the first 5 seconds of every one of these songs. That they are amazing songs, but it's because everything in it is about rhythm and about funk and about energy, and even Brown's voice is an instrument. I mean, half of the lyrics on these songs are just absolute. Either they're absolute nonsense, or it's just And so like the grunts are as much of an instrument and as much of a texture builder on these songs as anything. Now, also Mother Popcorn starts this tradition. I guess effectively starts it. I mean, he had done this once or twice before, but where he has these songs that are broken up into parts 1 and 2, or as many as parts 1, 2, 3, and 4. And Mother Popcorn is notable because part 2 is an amazing solo from Maceo Parker. It's a tenor sax solo that is just an absolute sizzler of a song on here. And Mother Popcorn, for what it's worth, is another one of those songs like Cold Sweat that was sampled in every way, in every form, by everybody for like 5 years in early stage New York hip hop. Incredible piece of music, incredible performances by all the musicians, especially Maceo Parker.
Yeah. Now coming up next, Get Up, I Feel Like Being a Sex Machine, from 1970, number 2 R&B, only number 2, and number 15 pop. Now, how this song only made it to number 2 in the R&B chart and only number 15 in the pop chart is beyond me. As far as this curmudgeon is concerned, this is the definitive James Brown song and should be his signature song. By early 1970, Brown's band had had enough of his super strict dictatorial ways of management and frankly, his verbal abuse. They also wanted a raise, which the notoriously stingy Brown wasn't ready to give.
Yep.
So, hence, he fired all the members except for the drummer, who insisted on staying, and went around the Cincinnati area, looking for a new young band. Cincinnati is where King Records was based, and he went there in order to find a new band. He came upon a group of young guys headed by the brother duo of Phelps Catfish Collins on guitar and William Bootsy Collins on bass, and they went on to become known as the JBs. This slimmed down six-piece band provided not only a youthful exuberance to Brown's funk, but a harder edge than Brown's funk ever had before. This is a calling card, clarion call for all funketeers throughout the universe. One of my all-time favorite tracks, one of the greatest songs of the 20th century. Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. The interpolation of "Shake Your Moneymaker" by Bobby Byrd. That's Bird's finest moment as Brown's hype man on this song. Because Bobby Byrd is he's the yeah. When you think of the yeah in the James Brown parody,
that's him.
Bobby Byrd is the yeah. Rock and roll's greatest hype man, for sure. The interesting thing about Sex Machine and a lot of the songs from this period, there's a very brief period where Catfish and Bootsy are involved. It's the one period where the horns are not the definer. It's the guitar and the bass.
Yes.
And that guitar lick from Catfish on this thing is incredible. And obviously, Bootsy's one of the greatest bassists who ever lived. Now, there's a reason that he was short-lived in Brown's band, because let's face it, if you're Bootsy Collins, you're not going to listen too well to anyone, let alone James Brown, telling Bootsy Collins how to play bass. He's not going to be the kind of guy that's going to put up with James Brown's dictatorial ways, and say, do it my way or the highway. It's like, bitch, I built the highway, or bitch, I am the highway.
And also Bootsy liked to get high, smoke pot, take acid, and that didn't go well with James Brown.
Brown. For say what you want about Brown, but Brown, he might have had his own drug problems, but that dude was a professional, and so you screw around with him, it doesn't work. But essentially, you've got Brown and Bootsy, who are two of the most unique people that ever walked the face of the earth. Yeah, as if they're going to get along, But I kind of agree with you. This is pretty much Brown's quintessential song. It's the greatest riff that anybody associated with any of his songs ever came up with. For sure. I mean, it's a guitar song. It's that, and then I think Byrd plays piano, and Brown, at least on the quote unquote live version, the second version from 1970, plays organ. But so the piano solo is Byrd, and so there's a musicianship on this song that's incredible too.
Yeah.
For sure.
Another thing about this song that cannot be overstated: this song oozes primordial sex.
Oh yeah,
sweaty, hot, smoldering sex that you can melt a stick of butter with and put the remains in every orifice your partner has.
Yeah, pretty much.
Sometimes, listen, fuck that. Most of the time, you just need a song that is solely about feeling like a sex machine and wanting to fuck, that still manages to not objectify anyone in the process. This is about enjoying sex, feeling sex, being sex. Before George Michael wanted your sex, James Brown claimed he was your sex.
Yeah, and boy was he. You're talking about semen stains the mountaintops. No, semen stains your stereos. Through the form of get up. I feel like being a sex machine. Sure.
Yeah, totally. And the sex continues. Next, Superbad from 1970. Number 1 R&B again, number 13 pop. What's this song about? It's about James Brown having soul. And you know what? He's super bad. He feels so good, he wants to kiss himself. Never has a song about sheer, proud narcissism felt so inspiring, so moving, and so universally resonant. He goes into himself so much that it makes you want to love yourself the same way. It's also one of the most tense, tightest funk grooves anyone has ever come up with, punctuated by that delectable horn section and shocking, skronking atonal saxophone solo that wouldn't be out of place on an Ornette Coleman album. Chris?
Nope, not at all. This is one of those songs. There's very few songs that I cannot sit still when I listen to this song. You listen to it, and just even like the corniest ass like no rhythm white people will at least bop to this song. It is all danceable rhythm and energy, and just so superfluous and supreme, and whatever other adjectives you want to say. It really is a super badass song. And just the bridge on it is just this impossibly hard driving song. Notice, by the way, that all of these songs, basically starting from Cold Sweat, they get more intense and more up tempo and more hard driving and more maximal as they go along. I mean, it's kind of like a train going off the tracks.
All these tracks have momentum. It's all about building momentum. Absolutely.
And it really is. I mean, because think about it, we have not ratcheted down in intensity at all.
Yeah.
Basically, once you get the Cold Sweat, it's just up and up and more up and more up and more up. But hey, guess what? In this segment, we still have more up to go. I mean, Superbad is pretty fucking awesome, but that's not the most like unhinged of the songs.
Unhinged is the next one, which Get Up, Get Into It, Get Involved from 1970. Number 4 R&B. Number 4. Number 34 pop. It's the one that he used to close all his set lists during this period. It's probably the most hyperkinetic single of this period of Brown's career. Get Up, Get Into It, Get Involved is an unstoppable, like you said, locomotive train of high octane, fast paced funk. The horn section rides a hypnotic, trancy motif that lets up only in the bridge with this choppy chicken scratch guitar solo. This is a powerhouse performance that is one of several Brown tracks that had a deep influence on the burgeoning Afrobeat movement that would eventually be spearheaded by Fela Kuti. Yes, Fela was listening to James Brown. Chris?
Was he? Yeah, and you can tell this is about as Afrocentric as the songs get. This song is amazing. It's essentially the same exercise as Get Up, I Feel Like Being a Sex Machine, but
on steroids.
but the call to action is community activism rather than sexual satisfaction. But it's this arrangement, that fat ass bass line, the conga, the horns, the speed of it, and just the gnarliness of it. I mean, just the energy and almost like pseudo rage that Brown and Bobby Bird are sort of scream. They're almost like screaming their parts. It's like, get up, get into it, get involved, get involved.
When you're having your back problems again, Chris, this is what you need to listen to.
Yeah, no shit. I was gonna say it'll be cathartic, man, cathartic. It really is just, it's extraordinary, and it's just, I guess Brown just, I think as I was preparing for this episode, the word that kept coming over and over again in my head, nihilism. When he first makes that decision in '66 that he's bored with being with being the R&B frontman crooner of all crooners. From that period on, he just gets more and more and more nihilistic and kind of don't give a fuck, and has that swagger of knowing what he wants to do and going for it, and just shoving that rhythm down your throat and doing what he does just more than anything. But that that idea of that inspiration of shifting all the emphasis from the 2 and the 4 to the 1 and the 3, and then just once he had his gimmick, or once he had his concept, to just keep adding, just piling on layers, and just caking on more and more shit. to it as he went on. It's just it's an extraordinary evolution of confidence for just unbelievable.
Yeah. What is truly unbelievable is next. It is not a single, it's a live album called Sex Machine from 1970, a double live album. Number 4 in the R&B charts, number 29 in the pop charts. Now, Live at the Apollo gets all the plaudits, but for me, this is James Brown's best live album. Beyond that, if I were to count live albums on my own list of the 500 greatest albums of all time, this would easily be top 100, if not top 50. Of all the live albums Brown put out, this is the one that shows just how much of a force of nature this guy and his band was as a live performer and performers. All the versions of these tracks are more intense, they're funkier, they're more driven, and flat out filthier than the original single releases. Now, calling this whole thing a live album is tricky. Disc 1 was actually recorded in the studio with audience noise reverberation edited in to make it sound live. Disc 2 is a purely live album with all of it recorded in Augusta, Georgia's Bell Auditorium, now known as the James Brown Arena. So take that as you will. Chris?
Yeah, and so you made the point I was going to make, that it's one of the first two sides are the greatest phony live record ever made.
Yeah.
In the sense that they piped in the crowd noise and added all that funk, that stadium filling reverb in the mix. It's really funny, by the way. In a way, you can kind of tell that it's contrived, because I love when they're doing the version of Sex Machine on there, and it goes to the bridge, and you get like the most tasteful and the most like lightly spirited clap from the audience, applause. And so it's not like people go like screaming their heads off or shaking in unison. It's almost like a tennis match. To the bridge. And so that I almost wonder if they did that as a joke. It just kind of stands out. It's almost like it's a Japanese audience or something. And so that's extraordinary. But then I think my favorite part of this record, and one of the smarter things on it, is Brown and company. They do an instrumental cover of Blood, Sweat, and Tears' Spinning Wheel, which really is game recognizing game. Now, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, they were basically a blue-eyed soul band, and they had scored a hit, I think a year earlier with Spinning Wheel, which was just basically their take on James Brown. I mean, it's clearly influenced by Brown and other sort of early funk artists, because it's squarely built on the 1 and the 3, and it's got those horn arrangements, and it's just it's basically David Thomas taking things just absolutely to next level on like the Soul Brother, like the White Soul Brother #1 routine is that. And so I think by Brown doing his sort of tasteful organ driven version of Spinning Wheel, again, it's almost like a wink and a nod of like, oh, I influenced you to write this amazing piece of music. Well, I'm gonna give you credit, because ain't I so great that I influenced you, and I'm going to do it just as well, if not better. Because as far as
I think he does do it better,
and I think Brown actually plays organ on it. So because Brown played organ when he performed live. If he did an instrument, a lot of times it was organ.
Occasionally drums. But he would play organ live. And so I think that's kind of a neat touch on this record. And then, like you also said, you just have these just incredibly energetic versions of his songs, like Mother Popcorn that ends this record is like just ridiculously just edgy. On this episode, we gave you the super funky second part of our 3-part James Brown retrospective extravaganza. For the next episode, we bring you the conclusion of James Brown's epic story. From the mid to late 1970s, disco had, like it did to many of his era and generation, made Mr. Brown practically irrelevant and relegated to has-been status, playing to half-empty theaters, whereas previously he would have packed these places. But two things happened in the 1980s that revitalized the Godfather of Soul's reputation, both commercially and artistically. Commercially, not one, but two Hollywood movies brought Mr. Brown back into the public consciousness, and by the middle of the decade, resulted in one of the biggest hit songs of his career. Artistically, the hip-hop revolution exploded in the 1980s, and with that explosion came the genre's undeniable, obvious debt to the influence of Mr. Brown's intimidating, illustrious body of work. Unfortunately, his increasing drug addiction reached intimidating levels as well as his troubling relationships with women. Yours truly, Curmudgeons, will cover all of this and more up to Mr. Brown's passing in 2006, when his place as undisputedly one of the most important American musical figures of the 20th century was solidly assured. Join us next time for James Borwn, the super bad Mr. Dynamite of all legacies, Part 3. Next, we go to 1971, the first single James Borwn released that year, Soul Power, number 3 R&B, number 29 pop. And not as high as recently, but it's still a great track. James Borwn and the JBs slow the funk down to a simmering, sizzling, slow burn marathon. The long version is 12 minutes long. And this is a masterclass in controlled intensity. One of the catchiest horn arrangements of all of Brown's Herculean singles rides on top of an unstoppable groove led by Catfish Hunter's bird chirp guitar. It is a funk workout par excellence. Brown was burping great singles at this point. Chris?
Catfish Collins, by the way, not Catfish Hunter.
Catfish Collins. Thank you. My God. That's the baseball pitcher. Good Lord.
Yeah, exactly. wrong catfish, motherfucker. Yeah, you actually hit the nail on the head, by the way, that it's in 71 that you notice that things start to get a little bit slower and a little bit looser. It's hard to say that they get more mellow. You can't really say mellow. If anything, the intensity becomes more slow burning, and because it's more of a slow burn, it may be that much more intense. And this is kind of where it is. And it throughout this period, it slows down a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, and it kind of starts here. And what you also notice is that the horn arrangements start to really get breathtaking here. And this is kind of because Fred Wesley is kind of in the leadership of the arrangement here, and so so the horns start to get almost menacing. There's almost a menace in these arrangements that start with Soul Power and beyond. And so it's like there's as much sliding and bopping that goes on here than rumbling and exploding, which that period from Cold Sweat, all the way through the end there, all the way through 1970, where it just kept it was like a jackhammer. Now it's like he's taking the pedal off the gas just a little bit, although maybe he's poking holes in the gas tank. It's more dangerous now, for sure.
All right, next on this list, again, we're still in 1971. Hot Pants, number 1 R&B, number 15 pop. Bootsy Collins and the JBs had left James Borwn, with most of them joining George Clinton and his budding P-Funk empire at the time. Borwn assembled a new version of the JBs, and no momentum was lost. By this time, Borwn was, like you said, Chris, was slowing his funk down to an almost meditative effect, and Hot Pants is exemplary of that. It's his highest charting hit since Superbad. It was also his last single for King Records. It's also one of his most sampled songs. Parts of Hot Pants have been used by Public Enemy on Fight the Power, the Stone Roses on Fool's Gold, Kylie Minogue on Step Back in Time, and Marky Mark, i.e. Mark Wahlberg and the Funky Bunch on Good Vibrations. Chris?
Yeah, Hot Pants is definitely very much sampled, but it also has probably my favorite guitar lick from any of his songs.
Yeah.
It's almost it's a lead part, but it's almost like the riff of it. So you
Yeah.
get this like really great little horn riff, but then you get this it's almost like a little lick or like a little what would you call it, like a kiss
Yeah.
that's on it. And so it's just a really cool track that just kind of snakes and, hey, my favorite word, slithers all over the place. And so it's one of Brown's better songs, and it's a workout. And it's another one of those parts 1 and 2 songs where like the bridge is just really, really cool. There's a live version of Hot Pants actually where he speeds it up, and again, this is more of another fine example of the master of tempo, and where there's a live version where it's like basically played at like maximum speed, where they're able to replicate those horn parts on the bridge, but they do it at turbo speed, and so it's like wow, and it just fucking rocks.
Yeah.
So just
anyway,
a lot of talent that surrounded that dude. I'm telling you, man.
Sure. And then the JBs, the original JBs were great, but hey, the ones he replaced them with were still pretty damn good too.
Yep.
Anyway, next, last great single from 1971, Make It Funky. Number 1 R&B, number 22 pop. In 1971, James Brown moved on to Polydor Records, a subsidiary of the German label Gramophone, with Polydor buying back all his back catalog from King Records, which eventually went defunct. His first release would be Make It Funky, another mid-tempo groover with a twinkling keyboard motif in the background that eerily resembles some of the synthesizer sounds that would emanate almost a decade later. A killer bass line guides the track along as Brown shouts out his favorite items on the traditional Southern soul food menu towards the end. Chris?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite pieces of music of all time. The single, yes, is the shorter version with the piano tinkles in there. But do yourself a favor, folks. It's on the streaming services. You need to listen to the full 12-minute and 45-second in studio recording, parts 1, 2, 3, and 4 of Make It Funky. It is one of the single greatest pieces of recorded music ever, and it is funk as orchestra, and literally because Brown is at times talking and conducting his players through what they're doing, and so it's amazing because you would think that like a room full of people saying the same 3 words, chanting those over and over and over again, like the whole Make It Funky that never stops for 13 minutes. It never stops. But to build it on top of that, where the bass seems to get thicker, and then Maceo gets a turn with an amazing sax solo, and then towards the end of the song, one of the most remarkable things I've ever heard is Brown and Fred Wesley. When Wesley, it comes time for him to do his solo on Make It Funky, Brown basically working with Wesley, basically conducting him by mouth, where there's a call and response where Brown mouths the part that he wants from Fred, and Fred plays it. And it's this amazing interplay. And again, it just goes on, and the song ends with Brown commanding his guitar player to replicate a B.B. King blues lick, and so just the contours of it, just the way that it's built, the construction, the hypnotism of it all, because the chant never stops, and the funk the groove just keeps getting deeper and deeper and more textured, and it's marching music. I mean, basically, this was Sunday in the Park marching music for African American people that were coming of age in the late 60s and early 70s. That's what funk was. And this song and this recording, Make It Funky, parts 1, 2, 3, and 4, absolutely prove it. Go check it out immediately.
Yeah, you can find it on YouTube if you don't want to pay for a subscription, like I do.
It is on YouTube.
Yeah.
The full 12 minutes 45 seconds is on YouTube.
Right. All right. Coming up next, now we go into 1972 with Talking Loud and Saying Nothing. Number 1 in the R&B chart again, number 27 pop. Now, while released in 1972, this was actually recorded 2 years previously with the Bootsy Collins-led JBs. Now, no wonder this has one of the most killer bass lines on any James Brown recording. I think it's Bootsy's best bass line on his James Brown work. This is down and dirty funk at its very best. Chris?
Yeah, I mean that the mixture of that, like, I mean, almost like drunken languid bass line with the congas and the sort of the organic percussion. Yeah, this was a weed smoking song extraordinaire.
Stoner Brown.
Yeah, this was Stoner James Brown for sure. This is not a song to stay sober to. It's probably his. In a way, it's almost funny. You almost wonder if they did it as a joke, because there's nothing else in terms of the rhythm or the tempo quite like it in this entire period. It's almost like a one-off, them screwing around in the studio kind of thing, but it works, man. It works.
Yeah, totally. What also works? Get on the Good Foot from 1972, number 1 R&B again, number 18 pop. Really big hit for him, actually.
Yep.
If the previous song had one of the best bass lines on any James Brown track, Get on the Good Foot has one of the most insanely catchy horn riffs on any of his records. James brings the funk back to an up-tempo pace, and a couple of delicious bass solos by Fred Thomas, very underrated bass player. Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you get the bass licks on Get on the Good Foot, but there's also this little punchy little guitar part, and like you said, that horn riff is insane. And just with the suppleness and the I don't know, the art. What would you call it? There's a suppleness, or almost an athleticism to it that's just extraordinary, and
thick ass textures is what I would say.
Yeah, exactly. And the song is just catchy as hell. It just has this kind of like fun little shuffle to it.
Right.
I'm actually a bigger fan of a song that came out the same year, Don't Tell It, which it kind of comes from the same. It's not quite as jittery, but it has the same kind of smoothness to it. I mean, these are some of his smoothest songs that basically came out of the same recording session. But yeah, Get on the Good Foot is about as good as it gets, man. And that's very, very, very. You could tell Fela was very influenced by that song too.
Oh yeah,
because that has a very, very Afrobeat rhythm. What became known as
Fela Kuti equals James Brown plus jazz horn sections plus African rhythms. There you go.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, coming up next from 1973, one of my favorite song titles in the entire James Brown catalog. I got ants in my pants and I want to dance. Number 4 R&B, number 27 pop. It has a nifty jazz breakdown in the bridge. Brown's funk formula starts to get, a little formulaic at this point, but when the formula is this effective and irresistible, who's complaining? This is a great track. Chris?
Yeah, it's kind of it's a bizarre song in the sense is that, like most songs are structured verse, chorus, bridge.
Yeah.
This one is verse, bridge, chorus.
Yeah.
And so it's got this kind of bizarre structure, and it's very alien type song. And what I love is that the verse and the chorus. The verse has absolutely nothing to do with the chorus. That the verse might as well just be gibberish. The whole ants in my pants thing, and sort of grunts and all that, and that silly little like swinging horn thing. But then all of a sudden he's romantically challenged and just really pained in his soul in the chorus. And like I said, and then the bridge is just like that. That's another that bridge. That's another heavily sampled part in early hip hop. but I think a lot of folks, and I know, speaks to Judd Apatow and Steve Carell's talents in comedy, that the reference I get immediately when I hear this song is from The 40-Year-Old Virgin. If you remember that, there's a scene in that where Carell's walking down the street and he's terrified of all the hot women that he's passing. And the song is "I Got Ants in My Pants and I Want to Dance." So, yeah, just a really eccentric nugget from Brown. It's one of his more eccentric songs because, like I said, who thinks to put the bridge in the middle of everything?
Right, I know.
You know, the bridge is supposed to be like, if a song has 4 acts, the bridge is supposed to be act 3, not act 2.
Yeah, well, James Brown is part of what made him a visionary.
That's true.
Another track. The next one is, I think, one of the most underrated songs in his entire discography. The Payback from 1974.
Amazing.
Number 1 R&B, number 26 pop. One of the best pure funk tracks. And he's got a lot of them in his canon. It's amazing it only went as high as number 26 on the pop chart.
Oh, yeah.
This song came back into style back in 1995 as part of the soundtrack to the movie Dead Presidents. A really good film, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
This song, with a simple yet brilliantly placed guitar riff and pulsing, that's how you call a bass line, pulsing bass line.
Yeah.
Brown rants on someone who took his money and his woman, or lied to him, or cheated him, or he's not really clear on it. He's pissed off about some person. And it peaks with the immortal line, "I don't know karate, but I know crazy."
Yeah, it's actually crazer, not crazy.
Crazer, yeah.
Which makes even less sense.
This is the year George Clinton debuted Parliament, his most successful outfit, which would eventually take the funk zeitgeist away from Brown. But the very end of Mr. Brown's peak was still essential funk. Chris?
Yeah, one thing you have to understand too is that Brown, during this part in the early 70s, he started to do soundtracks to blaxploitation films.
Yes, he did. He did several of them.
Yeah, and this song, I don't know if the name of the movie was The Payback,
right.
But it comes from an album that ostensibly is the soundtrack to a blaxploitation film. And like Stone to the Bone and Mind Power and a few other songs are on the same record. So what he's singing about, he's basically playing the character of, the guy, of the aggrieved guy who's gotten his woman stolen and gotten his money stolen, and now it's like, you done messed with the wrong brother. It's kind of the song, but like you said, probably the second best riff in all of James Brown after Sex Machine. Just a nasty ass funk guitar riff that and again, because the song is like, what is it, like 9 minutes long or something? It's
7.5 minutes.
Yeah, it's another one of those songs that gets absolutely hypnotic. That repetition and that never-ending motif. Maybe it musically doesn't get texture, but like psychologically, it builds texture and tension. That by the end of it, there's several songs like that. You listen to them that it might be 7.5 minutes, but it feels like 37.5 minutes because of the investment of energy that you've put into it. That was one of his gifts, was rhythm as hypnosis.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. Hypnotic and trancy. I mean, it's a big part of funk, and it's a big part of what Brown did. You're talking about the soundtrack. The album that this song is from the album The Payback, that came out in December of 73. The single came out later in 74. The music on this album was scheduled to be the soundtrack for the blaxploitation film Hell Up in Harlem.
Oh, okay.
But the album was rejected by the film's producers. Director Larry Cohen, who directed the film, said the music was not funky enough. It was rejected, so Brown decided to put it out on his own as his own album.
God damn! I mean, how funky does an album have to be funkier than this album? That is one demanding ass director.
Not funky enough to James Brown.
It's worth noting, by the way, that his most famous soundtrack for one of those films is from Black Caesar.
Yes. Yeah, which is a good movie. I like that film.
Yeah.
I love most of those blaxploitation films. I have a big soft spot in my heart for them. Anyway, the next and the last song on this streak, My Thang with an A from 1974, #1 R&B, number 29 in the pop chart. What separates My Thang from other songs in this hard funk period of James Brown is that he brings back the majestic, drawn-out horn arrangements, something that was a staple of his early sound. This song dares you not to dance. That's how funky it is. This song was also sampled by DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, i.e. Will Smith, for Brand New Funk, Kanye West and Jay-Z for Gotta Have It, Heavy D and the Boys for We Got Our Own Thang, and Belle Biv DeVoe for Something in Your Eyes.
Yep.
Chris?
Yeah, My Thang is a heavily DJ. It's kind of worth mentioning. DJ Jazzy Jeff and Fresh Prince, they sample Brown a lot.
Yeah.
They're right up there with a couple of like the Rob Basses and Public Enemies, and even like De La. Jazzy Jeff was a big, huge influence on the James Brown sample movement.
Right.
One thing, and you kind of mentioned this, it's about 1974 that Brown starts singing real songs again.
Yeah.
That he's been obsessed with the one and making everything, even his voice, an instrument that all crashes on the same beat, and in the same motif. But now with stuff like the Payback and some of the songs on that album, and it's Down and Out in New York City, which I think is a little bit before this kind of presaged that. But you also get like Cold Blooded and Funky President and other songs that, again, where he's starting to sing for real again, like for real lyrics, and not quite as hyper or as just for lack of ridiculous in the best sense of the best sense possible. But he's starting to get a little bit more earthbound with this stuff in 74, and that kind of sets up what becomes sort of a disco-ish period for him, which some of his
downfall at this point.
Yeah, kind of his downfall, but it was he was on the verge of a downfall. This is sort of like My Thang and Cold Blooded, and that's kind of like James Brown's great last stand. And he comes back to real songs, and then I guess he gets obsessed. It's almost like he's back in time 20 years and trying to make everything that he touches a hit again.
Yeah.
And doesn't quite work in the third act, which we'll get into in part 3 of this here series. And
which brings us to the end of this episode
of part 2. Yeah, so we have now ended part 2, and like we said, part 3 will be the rest of the James Brown story. Like we said, this is just an extraordinary, and this was the best way for us to do it, was to just geek out on all of these songs, because you just see it, that this growth of aggression, of confidence, of the funk, of that rhythm machine, of that nihilism wave that not only became funk, but the best of disco. It influences Michael Jackson and Quincy Jones. It influences Fela Kuti. It influences like the Gap Band and Cameo and all those folks. It influences Chic, and then obviously it influences hip hop. It influences Prince. It influences Teddy Riley, and just like all obviously actually has a heavy influence on Biggie, because part of Biggie's persona is kind of taking James Brown's soul brother, #1, Sex Machine Man, and doing it for the 350-pound guy set.
Right.
So you take these 8 years and all these songs we just talked about, and it distills everything good in black music that came, and basically most music, not just black music, but almost all music that comes after it. Music is statement, and we just made it for you there. So
this period of Brown influenced everything from hip hop to electronic to EDM to techno to later on in the 90s neo soul to freaking trip hop. You name it, man. This was like
Rage Against the Machine.
Rage Against the Machine. This is the fountain, you know. Where
Yeah,
it all,
yeah. This is the fountain for funk, for soul, for hip hop, for protest music. You know,
Yeah.
say it loud. Me personally, I'm not black and I'm proud, but when I listen to it, boy, do I feel like it. So
Exactly.
there you go. And with that said, folks, as we are apt to do at the end of these episodes, please come join our curmudgeonly community on Facebook. Pretty vibrant up there. We get some really great conversations going. Arturo is in the midst of presenting his greatest albums year by year list. We just did
Studio albums,
not just albums, just studio albums for every year. He just did 71. By the time this album drops, or this episode drops, he'll have done 1972. So join our group at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock. If you have anything to say, if you agree with anything we've said, disagree, we'd love to hear from you. curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. And finally, we are still holding on. Twitter is a weird-ass place. If you have a blue check, that probably means you're a creep on Twitter now. But we're still there, at Curmudgeon Pod. We're still following the people we love, like Jason Isbell and Mike Mills. And we're still scorning the people we don't, like whoever runs Charlie Daniels' Twitter. I think it's his son. So yeah, the fact that the country music fascists are out full force on Twitter. God bless Elon Musk for making those guys feel like they stand 7 feet tall.